Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Burnham, and I'm the Assistant Director here at the American Swedish Historical Museum. We are thrilled to bring you this year's long series of virtual tours to mark the museum's 100th anniversary. So these are our third Thursday virtual programs. Our goal is to provide virtual learning opportunities to celebrate our centennial with our long distance community. So no matter where you are, we're really glad that you could join us. Today's talk will explore the museum's remarkable history, featuring our curator, Brett Peters. Just a couple housekeeping things to go over first. If everyone could please keep yourself muted during the talk, just to eliminate any background noise. And then if you have a question that you want to remember, go ahead and type that in chat. Otherwise, hang on to it and we'll invite everyone to unmute and ask questions live at the end of the program. So, if with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brett. Thank you so much today for being our guide as we celebrate the museum's 100th anniversary.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to talk to everybody about the museum's history. And I see Margareta in the crowd, Margareta Tollerman. Um, Margareta, I don't know if you can give a wave using the Zoom function, but Margareta was, a past curator at ASHM, and we're always glad to see her participate. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, very good. Okay. Um, Let me move that into the bottom corner. So today I'm really happy to talk with you all a little bit about the most recent exhibition, a kind of a behind the scenes tour of a century in the making, 100 years of ASHM. Now, for the purpose of this exhibition, the purpose of this presentation, rather, I want to talk to everybody a little bit about, really some fun facts behind the museum, some stories here and there. Uh, Really, this is going to be a 30,000-foot view of the exhibition and a 30,000-foot view of the history, the 100th anniversary of the museum. And I invite everybody to come to the museum if you can and come to the exhibition to check it out. Uh, in every room in the museum, there is at least one change, whether it's additional content or whether it's artifacts that have been added or removed. So, with that, let's get started. Thank you, everybody. This is a century in the making, 100 years of ASHM, the digital version. Now, to put the museum's 100th anniversary in context, uh, the museum was established at a time when radios were considered cutting edge technology. Eggs were 56 cents a dozen. I now pay about $6 a dozen. So, how long it's been. And Henry Ford had just introduced the 5-day, 40-hour work week. Throughout its history, ASHM has borne witness to the defining moments of the modern era, including the Great Depression, World War II, the moon landing, the fall of the Soviet Union, 9/11, and more. So I always like to start my presentations with a little bit of a roadmap. This gives you and I both an idea of how this presentation is going to go. We're going to start with talking a little bit about the impetus behind the establishment of the American Swedish Historical Museum, focusing specifically on the sesquicentennial, and of course, Amandus Johnson, the founder of the museum. We're going to focus a little bit on the building of the American Swedish Historical Museum. Uh, the architect was John Nyden, of course, with input from Amandus Johnson. We're going to focus especially on the exterior and the interior of the building, how that process of building was disrupted during the Great Depression. And I'm going to share some stories that I found particularly fascinating from the exhibit, specifically relating to the new Sweden Gallery and, of course, the John Hansen Room, today the Immigration Gallery. We're going to talk a little bit about close calls in the museum's history, uh, how essentially how the museum almost didn't make it to 100 years. These will be stories from the Great Depression and the 1970s. We're going to talk a little bit about ASHM as a cultural ambassador, how ASHM, the American Swedish Historical Museum, appealed to famous faces and royals that have visited throughout its history. We're going to talk a little bit about how the museum has changed over the course of its history, I'm not going to focus so much at that point about individual galleries. Again, it's going to be kind of big picture, 30,000-foot view. I am happy to go in a little bit more depth, time permitting. Uh, but regardless, I encourage you to visit the museum if you can. And we're going to end with some closing thoughts and questions. So, a bold vision. Amandus Johnson, the founder of the museum, pictured to the right in around the early 1900s. Amandus Johnson was the foremost scholar of the New Sweden colony. The New Sweden colony uh, is one of the early European settlements in what is today America, at that point the New World. Amandus Johnson had a pretty, what at the time you would think an impossible dream, to build a museum that would highlight the Swedish immigrants who are too often overlooked in the American story. Now, ordinarily, starting a museum, any museum, whether it's a small museum, a mid-sized museum, or a large museum, would take years, if not decades, of planning and fundraising. In the lead up to 1926, it was made a little bit easier, specifically because of the sesquicentennial celebration. The sesquicentennial celebration was the 150th anniversary of the United States. Major anniversary years, whether it's the 150th, the 100th, the 250th, like this year, or the 200th, these anniversary years and these major celebrations tend to build civic pride, capture public attention, and make it easier to fast track or fund projects that might otherwise take a long time to put together or get off the runway. Supporting a permanent symbol of progress or culture is especially appealing to people during these moments, which is, believe it or not, why so many museums like ASHM, zoos, and heritage sites can trace their origins back to milestone celebrations like the sesquicentennial. Now, the sesquicentennial was held in South Philadelphia to celebrate 150 years of American independence. It was intended as a grand patriotic World's Fair extending across 1,000 acres. During the sesquicentennial, South Philadelphia was transformed. The area's streets, parks, and undeveloped land were built up with large temporary structures, exhibition halls, and ceremonial spaces intended to show the nation's progress, diversity, and international connections. Now, it was during this moment that Amandus Johnson began to sell the idea of a museum that would highlight the Swedish immigrants who are often overlooked in the American story to donors. And it very quickly took wing. Now, one topic that Amandus Johnson and the early fundraisers no doubt focused on was the New Sweden colony. The New Sweden colony, as I mentioned before, was incredibly important to Amandus Johnson, and Amandus Johnson viewed it as one of the foremost contributions of the Swedes to American history and American culture. Now, because he appealed to the sense of historicity, a lot of people did get on board. A lot of people did donate money to the fledgling museum at this time, and early members would have received a very interesting certificate pictured to the right. This certificate of membership by the American Sons and Daughters of Sweden certifies that whoever has contributed a sum for the establishment of the John Morton Memorial Building, which was erected by the American Sons and Daughters of Sweden. I'll get into this a little bit more in just a few minutes, but this certificate is fascinating on a number of levels. Regardless, though fundraising began earlier than 1926, the ground broke in 1926 itself on June 2nd, the day after the sesquicentennial opened. The museum began construction during the sesquicentennial celebration. The sesqui, for those of you who are interested in this topic, the sesqui was designed to be a boon for South Philadelphia and Philadelphia as a whole. It was meant to bring in around 30 million people to South Philadelphia. It was meant to go for 100 plus days. Unfortunately, the sesqui was a monumental flop. It rained for 84 out of the 100 odd days. And it just largely, because of the rain, only about 4.5 million people actually attended the Sesqui. Unfortunately, it was just an albatross. But regardless, the museum did begin construction during this time. It wouldn't finish construction on the exterior until 1928. The architect hired to oversee the building project was John Nyden, pictured to the right, a master architect and builder. So he designed the building with specific input from Amandus Johnson. Work on the interior of the building began in 1928 after it was finished, the exterior. Here's a photograph of the groundbreaking ceremony of the John Morton Memorial Building, which at that point, again, uh, was kind of beginning to be known as the John Hanson John Morton Memorial Building. You can see the Crown Prince in the front center. He broke the ground. Now, though the exterior of the museum technically finished construction in 1928, the interior took a lot longer, primarily due to the Great Depression. The museum officially opened to the public in 1938, but not every room was finished. Here's an early image of the American Swedish Historical Museum. Now, I threw this in here at the last minute. We talk about essentially designs that never happened and other really interesting designs for the museum in our current Chicago room. But during the Great Depression, the museum, the interior, the decoration, the design encountered a lot of obstacles, primarily due to funding. One of the items that had to be nixed from the original plans of the museum was a 42-foot tall statue of Mother Svea by Olaf Bjorkman. It was planned for the lawn. Uh, it was meant to go along with a fountain. You can see the blueprints to the right. In 1931, the museum had to contact Bjorkman and say that essentially the design wasn't in the cards. I threw this in because I like to kind of, you know, I really enjoy, kind of thinking about what if and, what would have happened if something else had happened. Uh, what could have been if the Great Depression hadn't occurred? Would the museum have opened more quickly? Would this statue now, greet visitors as they walked up to the museum? Who knows? But regardless, uh, while the interior of the museum was being designed, each individual room was designed with input from Amandus Johnson. Uh, I use the term he was more or less the grand architect of the building and its galleries from an academic and kind of, peripheral sense. He wasn't the actual architect or the designer. But every room was designed to more or less be a work of art and have a central work of art in it. Now, I personally think the Grand Hall is particularly beautiful, and you can see it juxtaposed here with the dining salon of the MS Scripsholm, um, elements of which it was made with by John Nyden. Now, while I think the Grand Hall is particularly gorgeous, not everybody agreed, specifically Amandus Johnson. Here's a really fascinating quote that myself and our project archivist, Jeff Cantwell, came up with as we were doing, research into the individual rooms. Uh, this quote is by Amandus Johnson. I spent hours with John Nyden discussing the plans of our building. I wanted a museum containing some architectural features found in Eriksberg Slot in Sweden and something from Mount Vernon, Washington's home in Virginia. The result is our building as you see it today, and I think you will agree that Nyden did a fair job, except in the entrance hall. Now, this is just a little bit of a boxing gif. Now, Johnson and Nyden appear to have butted heads with some respect. As the founding director and first curator of the museum, Amandus Johnson, was kind of the one that, would ultimately decide alongside other stakeholders what each gallery's focus would be, how it would look. This is perhaps why he and John Nyden butted heads. Um, Amandus Johnson was a fascinating individual. We celebrate him as the founder of the museum. There are instances that we found when researching the exhibition that he was difficult for people to get along with. This appears to have been one of those instances. Now, we're talking a little bit about the establishment of the museum, the construction of the exterior, the construction of the interior. Uh, the new Sweden Gallery, Amandus Johnson believed the new Sweden colony and the story itself to be the most important and overlooked contribution of the Swedes to the history of the United States. For that reason, the new Sweden Gallery was viewed academically as the most important gallery in the museum, kind of the heart of the museum, for lack of a better term. On the right is an image of a map hand drawn by Amandus Johnson of the new Sweden colony and the surrounding area. Something that I find really fascinating about the New Sweden Gallery and the New Sweden Room, as we delved into the history of each of the individual rooms, and A Century in the Making again focuses on not only the history of each room in the museum, but stories behind its founding, stories behind the personalities that designed the rooms, obstacles, conflicts between the groups, and of course, I think that no room better illustrates this fact than the New Sweden Gallery. Uh, this room experienced, and today I believe is the third iteration of the gallery. It was first established in the 1930s. Uh, it was amended in the 1950s, 1960s, and then it was addressed once again in 2011 with a redesign. The room itself, the main donor of the room, uh, he specifically donated $20,000 for the room itself, with a stipulation for $5,000 additional dollars if certain conditions were met. His name was Herbert Linden. He was a very interesting individual. He and his wife were proud supporters of the museum. His half brother, Kurt Jungstedt, pictured to the left, was actually the one that designed the tapestry that is still in our gallery today, pictured to the right. Now, the tapestry itself is meant to depict New Sweden, specifically the interactions between new Swedish settlers and the Native Americans that made up the area. The tapestry itself is pretty romanticized. It depicts kind of a utopia with, a essentially living spaces for the natives and living spaces for the Swedes. We know that this is not typically how the relationship would have been, but it's still fascinating nonetheless. Now, getting back to the obstacles that surrounded the room, Herbert Linden, though an incredibly generous benefactor to the room, he was not easy to deal with, specifically for the museum staff at the time. There was a lot of butting heads about the project, specifically parts that were ordered, and every bit of that room, every bit of the accessories were ordered from Sweden itself. That was by design. There were issues with logistics of the items coming to the U.S., and there was especially logistics issues behind the tapestry. Now, Kurt Jungstedt was given a specific budget, of which he blew through rather quickly. There's something of a controversy behind this specific story. This letter from February 9th, 1960, I believe is from the executive director at the time to Kurt Jungstedt. It details more or less what they discussed, what was going to happen with the tapestry, but largely it addresses Kurt Jungstedt just absolutely abusing the budget at the time, going way, way over budget. Uh, his failure to curb his expenses caused a major rift between the museum staff at the time. Roy Larson was the chairman of the board at the time. He actually recused himself from the project alongside the director at the time because they were having a lot of issues communicating with the principal donor on the project. The donor himself, Herbert Linden, was incredibly, incredibly upset that the museum had itself failed to curb the expenses of his half brother. There was a lot of argument between Lyndon and the museum staff at the time over who would bear this responsibility. It was absolutely fascinating to read through. At the time, it was probably horrible to live through, but the room came into being, uh, and today it is one of our most celebrated rooms in the museum. That's an interesting story that I found. Now, the John Hanson Room, the John Hanson Gallery, was opened on October 25th, 1931. There are reports in newspapers and of visitor letters saying that the crowd that came to the opening was gigantic. Uh, there was there were actually tons of people waiting to get in from the outside of the museum as well. Now, John Hanson, uh, the figure himself, was an influential founding father from Maryland. He was one of the financiers of the American Revolution. He was the first president in Congress assembled, meaning that he was the first president of the Continental Congress. Uh, the room was named after him because at the time he was believed to be Swedish. The original focus of the room was on American Swedes in public service during the Revolutionary period. This room was kind of the intellectual, uh, kind of accompaniment to the new Sweden Gallery, and of course the Golden Map Room. This is an image of the John Hanson Room, circa the 1930s, 1940s. The image is a little bit blurry. I do apologize. When copying or when scanning already somewhat blurry images, the image becomes even blurrier, unfortunately. But you can see some really interesting things with this room itself. You can see that, like many of the other like many of the rooms at the time, especially the New Sweden Gallery and the Golden Map Room, it was pretty plainly adorned. Today, it's a little bit more built up. And you can see a pair of curtains on the back leading in what is today our Pippi Longstocking room that had a Viking designed motif. I find that absolutely fascinating. But we'll get into John Hanson uh, right now and kind of, what happened with that story. Now, as we went through the stories of the individual rooms in the museum, these two stories really fascinated me. The story behind the New Sweden Room was a story of battle. It was a story of, essentially showing what can go wrong when you don't communicate correctly with a benefactor, or when you don't, very clearly articulate, your needs and what, and your wants and what can and should happen. Um, the John Hanson Room, it demonstrates what can go wrong when a museum or when an individual doesn't thoroughly vet information. Now, there was for the long time, and the reason that John Hanson was named for that room was because he was believed to be Swedish. The idea that he was Swedish originated in 1876, coincidentally at the Centennial of the United States, with George A. Hanson, a known source of dubious information. He was going into the genealogy of his family and claimed descendancy from John Hanson. Amandus Johnson accepted the fact that John Hanson was Swedish and unwittingly helped to kind of spread the myth for decades. For one, the museum was almost named the John Hanson John Morton Memorial Building. That would have been a catastrophe. The room was named after him. Amandus Johnson actually wrote a large tome, more or less illustrating John Hanson's Swedish roots. It was discovered in 1988 that John Hanson was not Swedish, and this kind of sent shockwaves through the Swedish American community. The museum had to abandon this kind of narrative, I guess you could say. We do have a bust of John Hanson in our storage area right now. It hasn't been on display, to my knowledge, from that time period. But everybody gets information wrong sometimes. It's not always great when a museum does it. In this time period, it wasn't so bad, but it could have been a lot worse had the museum been named after John Hanson. It would have been especially embarrassing for Amandus Johnson, who did kind of spread that myth for decades, but he was dead at the time. Now, again, 100 years is a long time. I mentioned this at the beginning. To put ASHM Centennial into context, the museum was established during a time when radios were considered cutting edge technology. Again, eggs were just 50 cents a dozen. Henry Ford had just introduced the 5-day, 40-hour work week. But, and I mentioned this before, uh, did you know that ASHM almost didn't make it to 100 years? Now, we've spoken a little bit about how the museum was built. We've spoken about John Nyden, the conflict between him and Amandus Johnson. We've spoken about a couple of the different galleries and some unique stories of obstacles behind that. We're now going to talk about some of the major obstacles that the museum has faced throughout its history. The first being the Great Depression. This image shows men lining up outside of a soup kitchen in 1931. The storefront sign reads free soup, coffee, and donuts for the unemployed. This image is not from Philadelphia. It's just kind of a catch-all image that illustrates the plight of the time. Everybody was affected by the Great Depression, including the American Swedish Historical Museum, which had, the exterior of the building was done, the interior was still being built. Several of the rooms had not been built yet, including the Stuga, and designed, I should say, including the Stuga, including the Chicago Room, etc. I've titled this page Nights at the Museum because this is personally one of my very favorite stories you know, that kind of illustrates the history of the museum and the kind of, you know, the really fascinating behind the scenes things that most people don't know about. And that is during the Great Depression, funds got so low that the museum couldn't afford the $900 needed to board the windows as required by city nuisance and building codes for vacant properties. Now, the museum at this point was considering closing down, but to do so and be listed as a vacant property, it needed $900 to board the windows. That's obviously a lot more in today's money. The museum couldn't afford it, so to prevent it from being classified as vacant, Amandus Johnson, the founding director and curator, moved into the museum. He slept in what is now the executive director's office. At the time, that was our Rambo library. He bathed in what is now the men's bathroom. At the time, it did have a shower that was taken out, I believe, in the early 2000s, and he prepared his meals in the kitchen. He actually even borrowed $2,500 from his own life insurance policy to keep the museum going. That's extreme dedication, and I find it, absolutely fascinating the lengths that Amandus Johnson did go to keep the museum open. It's the spirit of a true director and of a true, pioneer in this field. I have been searching desperately for an image of Amandus Johnson at this time, wandering the halls of the museum at night. I haven't been able to find anything, but we do also know that he didn't live here alone. The secretary and the janitor and the janitor's family also lived here as well. At this point, I don't know where they lived in the museum, but it's a fascinating story. I originally came into this story believing that he had moved in because the museum couldn't afford a caretaker at the time to be here while construction officials weren't here. And at this time, there was no gate around the museum, but this is absolutely fascinating. Now, another instance in where the museum almost went under was during the 1970s, specifically 1971 through 1975. During this time, the board of directors, or the board of governors rather, had a more or less 4 to 5 year long debate on what they should do. At this point, the museum was lacking in funds. Repairs needed to be made around the museum, whether it was the HVAC, the boiler, what have you. There were just repairs that had been needed to be made for quite some time. The museum couldn't necessarily afford it, so they flirted with the idea of closing the museum to the public, uh, merging with Gloria Dei Church, uh, selling off its contents and closing, or just, kind of becoming something new specifically. One of the individuals on the committee was Donald Hoagland. Another individual was Penelope Batchelor, who we'll talk about in a couple minutes. Donald Hoagland was on the side of discontinuing the museum and closing it down. You can kind of get from here his reasoning. He was kind of in charge of this committee at the time, to my understanding. He kind of oversaw the different personalities. There was a survey that was passed out to different members of uh, members of the board of governors, in which they were meant to vote for whether to close the museum, make the repairs, merged with Gloria Day, etc. Now, Donald Hoagland, I don't want to disparage him in any way, shape, or form. He had his reasons for having his belief as to why the museum should close. I find, just the larger debate to be absolutely fascinating. Now, one individual who was, while Hoagland was kind of a champion for the side that the museum should close, Penelope Batchelor uh, was a champion for keeping the museum open. This is her plan of action from March 8th, 1974, where she suggested that the Board of Governors decide to stay at the present museum building. The president of the board appoint an operating committee to essentially take the administrative load for the small staff. Uh, she proposed a number of things: that essential maintenance be accomplished right away, that downspouts and protective windows needed to be replaced. Uh, she believed that a committee should be essentially installed for this function, uh, that a strategic plan was needed. You can kind of see on the right, uh, I mentioned before that a survey was passed out to the Board of Governors at the time, as well as members of the special committee to make recommendations on the future of the museum. The options were as follows. One, repair the present museum as needed and continue the present programs with fundraising as needed. Two, recondition and modernize the present museum as needed with appropriate fundraising. Three, close the museum, dispose of the contents in a proper manner, and thereafter act in a manner of a foundation, using income as capital as deemed desirable. Four, repair the present museum as needed and change the exhibits as suggested by the museum committee. This would require additional fundraising over that of item one. Five, make a proposal to Gloria Day for a combined operation and arrange for raising the required funds. Six, you could leave comments, of which she left about a page and change of comments. Now, it was absolutely fascinating, the whole debate. Obviously, Penelope Batchelor's faction did win out in the end, and the museum did, not only continue in its current, in its current capacity, but it did change a couple of the exhibitions. Now, it just goes to show you how razor thin, um, the margin for error is. Now, today, the museum celebrates 100 years. It wasn't that was almost not the case several times. And I met with a previous executive director of the museum from the 80s and 90s. She did mention, a couple more times that the museum did go under as well. And it's absolutely just, again, fascinating how, that can happen over time. And it just goes to show you that it's not just the American Swedish Historical Museum that dealt with that. Hundreds of museums around the country, no doubt, dealt with that at different points. So I think it's absolutely fascinating to talk about. Now we're going to go ahead a little bit and talk about the ASHM as a cultural ambassador. And in the name of time, I want to take a beat at about 12:45 to open it to questions or comments. But throughout its history, ASHM has interacted with many famous guests, including Charles Lindbergh. I'm betting most people know him. Ingrid Bergman, Liv Ullmann, and Margaret, Claes Oldenburg, and members of the Swedish royal family. During these visits, ASHM prepared in a number of different ways, whether it was a ball, a gala, a fundraising dinner, an event, whether it was changing the exhibitions. We know for a fact that the Jenny Lind Room at one point got a facelift because of a royal visit, which is really, really fascinating. But the museum had to communicate grandeur. It had to communicate a certain level of sophistication. And in that way, it kind of acted as a cultural ambassador to these individuals who then ideally would spread the message of the museum. Now, Ingrid Bergman, Lauren did talk about her a little bit at our Centennial kickoff Zoom lecture in 2026. I believe it was in January. She showed a short film narrated by Ingrid Bergman showing the museum. Now, we don't believe that Ingrid Bergman actually came to the museum or was on site, but she did do the video, which is fascinating. Now, I'll show you a few pictures from the museum's history taken in 1964. This photograph actually shows Gulen Marianne Bernadotte. She's seated in the Nord Library during a museum visit. She was a Swedish actress, icon, philanthropist. She married Sigvard Bernadotte, the second son of Gustav VI Adolf, the King of Sweden. Another visit by a Swedish royal family member, Carl Gustaf, King of Sweden. He's pictured up top with Mayor Rendell in Philadelphia in the 1990s and at ASHM in 2013 with his wife. You can see the front door of the museum there. This image, and I find this to be absolutely fascinating, this image shows Princess Desiree of Sweden and Princess Birgitta of Sweden signing the museum's guest book during a royal visit in 1960. They look so young, so hopeful, and so happy to sign the guest book. We do have the guest book. It's still in the museum today. It does go on display every once in a while, and you can actually see their signatures, which is really fascinating. Now, this isn't necessarily an image of an individual, but it's representative of a famous interaction between the museum and an influential person. This is a letter from Charles Lindbergh to William Batt in 1939. In the signed letter, Charles Lindbergh accepts a membership invitation from the museum, and he actually encloses a check as well. That's something that we have in our archives, and I believe we have the original check as well. Again, it's fascinating. You learn about these individuals, you learn about their contributions, but it's very different to see their interaction with the museum in an official capacity. Speaking of which, Liv Ullmann, the star of many Ingmar Bergman films and the mother of one of his daughters, she visited the American Swedish Museum in 1982 at the kind of peak of her international fame when she was already considered one of the most influential actresses in Europe. She's pictured above, and I haven't been able to ascertain who those individuals are, but she's pictured. The image above shows her in what is now our assembly room, our Joseph Frank room. It shows her in front of essentially the cabinetry before it was painted white. And below, I believe she is in the Grand Hall specifically. That part of the image is cut out. Now, on to our next portion of this talk. We're talking about the ways that the museum has changed over time. I use the term adapt or die. It's a Darwinistic term. It relates to the term, it's essentially that an institution or a person needs to evolve and adapt or die over time. Now, the museum has changed in a variety of ways over the last 100 years. The museum has changed the ways in which it approaches guests with different themes. Now, one thing that the museum, and this is, a fact associated with the 1930s, 1920s when the museum was founded and built, the murals in the Grand Hall were done by an artist named Christian von Schneidau, with design input from Amandus Johnson. The ceiling mural itself is largely anachronistic. It's romanticized. We do know that there are a number of historical issues with the mural itself, notably that the mural depicts what would become the new Sweden colony, the landing of the Swedes in March of 1638. We know that February, January of 1638, December, they were extraordinarily cold for the time. And we do know that Native Americans would not have been wearing simply loincloths, and the Swedish settlers would not have been wearing lighter clothing like this. We also know that on the first voyage from Sweden to New Sweden, there were no women and children. This is a kind of romanticized, anachronistic view of history, and as a staff, we do tell the history. We do tell the history of the making of the mural with the fact that it was done in the 1930s, 1920s. The fact that history was viewed a certain way at the time. So one of the ways that we have changed as a museum is decolonizing past narratives, talking about history as it is, not as we wish it to be. We've also addressed blind spots. Now, in 2011, the new Sweden Gallery underwent a makeover. I know that an increased focus over time as well. was put on Native American interaction with the New Sweden settlers, whether they were Finns or Swedes. The Native Americans, predominantly the Lenni Lenape, were intrinsic to helping the settlers to continue on in the New Sweden colony. Now, the colony only lasted for 17 years, uh, but it would have probably been less had the Native Americans not helped the settlers in a variety of ways over the course of the years. We've addressed blind spots with our narrative of the New Sweden colony, specifically the way that it was told in the 1920s, 1930s, early 1900s, to being more inclusive, recognizing the contributions of Native Americans, whether they were Lenni Lenape or another tribe entirely. That's common museum practice, and it's evocative of the way that the museum has evolved over the years. Another way the museum has evolved in an interpretive fashion is not only in our storytelling with regards to decolonizing narratives or telling a more inclusive history, but telling the story of the average Joe, as I call it. Now, on the left, you saw that image earlier. That is an image of the John Hanson Gallery. On the right is an image of our Immigration Gallery. They're the same room. It's just been renovated over the course of decades. Now, the story at the beginning was the story of telling kind of the big names in colonial American policy and history on, as it relates to New Sweden and Swedish settlers. The story today in this room is immigration during the Great Migration from Sweden to the United States, and sometimes even back and forth. We've adapted a model of storytelling where we're including these narratives that people can really latch onto, and these narratives that people can find a home in. People, today, museum practice shows that people don't want to necessarily learn so much about, the big names and the big wigs. They want to learn how they relate to history, and there's no better way to do so than talking about immigration and ancestry. Another way the museum has changed over the course of decades is I use the term making history fun, but that's not largely correct in this way, shape, or form. Uh, the museum has become a little bit more kid friendly. Now, these images both show what is today our Pippi Longstocking room, what was in the 1960s our Dahlgren Burke room, which was dedicated to war. You can see in the back corner of the image to the left a display of halberds, swords, axes, and there's different materials relating to war in that image. The room largely focused on Swedish American and Swedish contributions to American conflicts. On the right is an image of the room today. It is an area for children and children at heart to explore their imagination and to learn more about Astrid Lindgren and Pippi Longstocking. This room, more than anything, demonstrates how museums change over time. Uh, our museum has gone from focusing more on, you know, war and these other narratives to trying to be more inclusive, trying to bring in families and children, knowing that, history doesn't age. It remains the same, but the people who observe history, who make it, and who tend to enjoy it are older. So we're endeavoring today to bring in families and children. And that's, again, just a way that the museum has changed with the times. Another way that the museum has changed over the course of the decades, and again, this is the 30,000-foot view of the exhibition itself. We do go into each of these different topics in extreme depth in the exhibition, and I invite you to come and check it out. Uh, we've made history largely accessible to all by being ADA compliant. Now, ADA compliancy became important in the 1990s, early 2000s. This ramp was installed in the early 2000s and the elevator as well. The ramp goes from the Pippi Longstocking room to the Stuga. There is a step from the Stuga to the library, of which we are always careful for guests to make sure that they know it's there. But this just goes to show you how we have tried to endeavor to become more accessible. Recent initiatives are translating exhibitions into different languages, including Spanish, Indonesian, Mandarin, so on and so forth. Another way that the museum has changed with the times is we are going beyond Sweden and Swedish America. We're including other narratives from other Nordic countries, whether it's Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Greenland, or Finland. We're including these perspectives and we're including these histories. We kind of, in my tenure here, we began, of course, with the sauna exhibition, and we've kind of, we went to talking about the restoration, the first organized emigration of Norwegians to the US. Today we have our Taste the Tech exhibition, which talks about Nordic contributions over the last 100 years on the US. So we've really endeavored to kind of go beyond Sweden and to include other narratives and other voices that are similar. So it's around 1245. That's a century in the making, 100 years of ASHM in a nutshell. Uh, I'd like at this point to open it up to questions or comments. Again, what I wanted to do for this exhibition was I really wanted to give you an overview of kind of the big ideas and big terms of the exhibition that we focused on, whether it was the building of the museum, the founding, uh, the environment around its founding, the ways it's changed, whether it was physically the galleries or whether it was interpretive wise. It's a fascinating museum. It remains a fascinating museum in every fiber of its being. It's an incredible, incredible place. Every room tells a unique story, and yet all of the stories merge into one. And I know the museum means a lot to everybody here today, and we hope that we did justice with the exhibition itself. Again, I do invite everybody to come and check it out. It is really fascinating. There is at least one new artifact and story per room. But again, I'll leave it open to any questions. And Lauren, I do you want to facilitate that?
Sure, I'm happy to. But I think you covered it. I don't see any questions in chat, but people can absolutely feel free to write a question if you're not in a place where you can ask. Otherwise, feel free to unmute. If you don't have a question, if you have something you'd like to share about a memory that you have of the museum, maybe it looked different or something about an exhibit that has changed or the evolution of that, we're happy to hear that as well.
And I should really quickly mention, as again, a thank you to Margareta Tellerman. Uh, we a lot of what we did research, we have binders relating to each individual room in the museum, whether it's the balcony, whether it's the new Sweden gallery, whether it's the Pippi Longstocking room. Some rooms have a ton of content, some rooms don't. But we're able to use Margareta's writings from when she was here as well to give a really, really incredible depth to this history. So, thank you to her. And I believe I saw in the chat, is the movie that I mentioned online somewhere? Yes, it is. It is on our YouTube channel. The movie is, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 20 to 40 minutes long. Okay,
Yeah, sorry. It's a fairly short film. I can put the link to it in chat, but we talk about it and kind of go over the history of it in our first Zoom program of the year. So I'll put that in chat in just one second. Brad, if you want to minimize your
of course.
yeah, then yeah. So we're happy to take questions.
I see Rudolf Soderlund, and I do hope I'm pronouncing your name right, sir. Can I explain how the museum obtained the land in the 1920s? So, for those of you who do not know, the museum is situated on land in current FDR Park, then League Island Park. The park was founded in the 1910s, became, of course, FDR Park much later on. Uh, but the process for obtaining the land, I'm not positive how specifically it was obtained. I do know that it was obtained for a reason. I do know that at one point there were plans to make a museum row in FDR Park. It never came into being. ASHM is today the only museum in FDR Park, which is fascinating what could have been. But Amandus Johnson urged the American sons and daughters of Sweden to acquire land specifically in FDR Park because this area was on land that was originally deeded by Queen Christina of Sweden to Fen Scoot of the New Sweden colony. So it has an important tie to the New Sweden colony there. Another reason why they chose the land in current day FDR Park was because it was conveniently situated kind of at the heart of what would be the sesquicentennial celebration. There were some different tenets of the celebration in FDR Park specifically a Russian boathouse, a Japanese pavilion, and I believe a Russian tea house as well. Of course, we I don't know for a fact what was here relating to the museum. I do know that there would have been a presence as they were beginning construction, but I do know that there was a contingent. There was some kind of history presentation about the Swedes at this time. I just don't know where specifically it was, but largely the reason they chose this land was because of its connection to Sweden and because of, essentially because it would have been well seen by attendees to the sesquicentennial. Of course, there were nowhere near enough attendees, but it's fascinating nonetheless.
All right, so let's take I see Norman Marcus has his hand up. We'll take a question live and then we'll go ahead and read the one that just came in through chat. So Norman, if you like to take a short minute and you can ask your question.
Yeah. Well, number one, the sesquicentennial was an idea suggested by John Wanamaker and picked up by the local, very corrupt politicians there and so on, uh, to make it. But it leads me to think that 1974, all those serious issues financially, but the bicentennial was coming up also,
Yep.
and did that in your research? Did you? And I want to commend you. This was a fantastic program. Uh, so
Well,
really,
thanks, Norm.
yeah, you and Lauren and everyone else. But was there anything in your research that showed communications with the mayor, the park commission at the time, regarding the planning for the bicentennial, which was ongoing before 74 and certainly afterward, including with National Park Service?
Yeah, so what's really funny is you should mention the bicentennial. Now, of course, the bicentennial in 1974 and during this really great debate on what to do with the museum was really forefront. Now, Penny Batchelor and what's so funny is Jeff and I specifically found a quote by Penny Batchelor in which throughout this great debate, I call it, she wrote, "Let's get on with it so we have something for the king in April," uh, meaning for the bicentennial.
Mm-hmm.
Now there was a royal visit during that time. Penny was very much on the train of let's figure this out. We're and get something done so we have something for the king. That something eventually became different renovations to the museum. But as I haven't come across any communications between the city and between the museum or staff at the time. What I do know specifically is that Penny, uh, Donald Hoagland, and the board at the time were very, very aware of the bicentennial. And they were aware that they needed to do something if they were going to keep the museum, they needed to do something quick. And they were aware that even if they didn't keep the museum, they needed to have some kind of presence, which was the originator of the idea for merging with Gloria Dei Church. Uh, so, you know, I don't necessarily, yeah, Tracy.
I just wanted to say I did check the archives because I remembered we do have some correspondence with the
We do.
mayor for our founding, at
Yeah.
the time of our founding, Mayor Freeland
Hmm.
Kendrick. So
Yep.
we do have correspondence. I think that's what you were sort of asking about, Norman. And yeah, it was very political then. And I'm sure that's how we ended up getting the land that we did was politicking, good old fashioned politicking.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Ver was involved because he was doing the trash hauling and concrete and all of that. But I'm saying I think through the free library and some other sources and city records, and the park commission records, not that easy. I think you'll find that there probably is a trail. I vaguely remember stuff like that sort of going on there, and I was at SEPTA then, so I would be seeing these things and working at pretty high level. So yeah, I think you may find stuff if you look. Nothing's ever easy.
Yeah.
Well, we're
Yeah.
continually, expanding our collection and resources,
Yeah.
and people will sometimes come across archives, even at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, that has a lot of Amanda Johnson's collection. So it's always great to cross-reference resources with other organizations. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
All
also
right.
Penny was very far-seeing, so
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I believe the question in the chat was regarding how far in advance was the museum's cornerstone ceremony planned out. I'm not sure
Hmm.
about that one. Any thoughts there, Brad or Tracy?
Yeah, I haven't been able to find anything yet on how far in advance it was planned. I do know that, typically you have to contact, at least today, you have to contact the royal family very far out to get them onto your schedule. I don't know how it was in the 1920s. I imagine it was similar. But, Tracy or even Margareta, maybe, if you have an idea or an inclining. Yeah.
Well, Margareta, I believe that the king and who was then the crown prince and the crown princess were really on a private tour of the United States, which
Hmm.
was more or less their sort of
Sorry,
wedding.
this is Jason. I'm the one who asked the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's just something that I found when I was researching the
Yeah.
Erickson Memorial.
Yeah. And yeah, they were on a private tour of the US, but I'm really curious and I'll have to do some digging into that because I can't imagine they just sent over an invitation of, hey, because you're in the US, why don't you
Right.
roll on over to Philly? I imagine there was some level of planning. I just don't know how far in advance that would have been, because I know that they did plan the groundbreaking to be on that specific date, to coincide with the sesqui, to coincide essentially on the first official day of it, because they wanted the publicity, they wanted more people.
Right.
But I don't know, and I have to look into how far in advance that was planned as well for the sesqui, because it all kind of goes hand in hand. But I'll look into it and get back to you because I'm curious as well.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
think they did some other things while they were here too, didn't they? Um, was it at a cabin or a colonial society? There was another group that had something that was going on nearby. So, like the Royals often do, they bundle their visit with multiple stops. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
They
I'm
also
Yeah.
sure.
went to New York City.
Yeah.
But Philly, DC, and New York are the only ones that I've found
Hmm.
researching it.
Yeah.
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 All right. I think we're pretty much coming to time. So, does anyone have a last minute burning closing question they'd like to share or ask? All right.
All right.
I think we'll end it there then. Speaking of planning things in advance on people's schedules, you may have noticed that I put in chat if you'd like to continue celebrating the centennial and celebrating the museum with us and our fabulous history. We are having our Centennial Gala coming up on Saturday, October 17th. So you can go ahead and click that link or visit our website under events, and you can see all the amazing options we have to participate with our Centennial Gala. So we hope that we can see as many people there as possible. Additionally, if you're interested in supporting the museum through membership or through donating to our centennial, you can feel free to reach out at any point to us here at the museum, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. So, thank you all so much for joining us for today's Third Thursday virtual lecture. And next month, we will be hosting, the topic will be on Greta Garbo. So, please make sure to visit our website. We'll have that registration up in just a few days. Thank you all very, very much for joining us. And please, please do come by the museum and see the Centennial exhibit in person. Thank you so much, Brett, for giving us a wonderful talk today.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to mention to everybody that we're at through July, we're offering free tours of the Taste the Tech, and the larger 100th anniversary exhibit, given by me, at 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. If anybody's interested in learning more, whether it's with me or without me, that's a really great day to visit.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Definitely join one of Brett's tours. It's um, free with admission or free for museum members, and we always encourage museum membership. So come out and see us. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.